So today I'm going to be doing a review of the newest release from Dan Henry. It is another chronograph, and really as soon as I saw it released I just bought it. So I'm pretty excited to show you guys. Let's get into it. So here we have this great looking chronograph by Dan Henry. And before we get into the watch too much, we'll look at the packaging. It comes in the classic Dan Henry hard shell, whatever you call this thingy. And of course you open this up and you get this nice canvas roll. I don't know how many other of the models come in this colorway, but I think most of the other ones have been brown. So I like the nice change to this black and gray color scheme. When you open this up, you have the nice black leather, the Dan Henry here, embossed right there. Nice black leathering. We have the international warranty card. We have the nice brown strap that it comes with, which I think looks really good on the watch. And then also it comes with an extra black leather strap with matching black stitching. And each of these straps have signed buckles, and they taper from 20 down to 16. So a nice vintage type of taper. But yeah, I like the watch roll. It's really useful, it's really nice, it's really convenient, and it's just a good addition to have, especially at the price point of this watch retails for $260. So I think for all that, what you get, it's a pretty good deal. So if you want a more complete version of the history of the Dan Henry brand, you can look at the last Dan Henry review I did. But just a quick summation, Dan Henry, he's a pretty famous collector of watches. He has so many watches from all decades, and he decided, hey, there's so many great watch designs, but they're pretty much unattainable to the common person. So I'm gonna mix and match the designs, recreate them for a modern sensibility, put affordable, usually Seiko movements in it, and boom, Dan Henry watches. So he always takes design language from watches of the period he names the watch after. This model is the Dan Henry 1962. So the 1962 is calling its heritage after such things as the Speedmaster, which you see in the twisted lugs. It's calling things after the Universal Geneve with the hands. I mean, it's a beautiful watch. It is erring on the side of homage, but I think it's not only well done, but it is also just a nice alternative, because not everyone wants to spend multi-thousand dollars on watches. You know, some people just want a nice looking watch for fairly affordable. So let's take some dimensions of this watch. A diameter of 38.5, but if you can see, the bezel hangs out past the case. So if we take the case by just itself, we actually get a diameter closer to 37.5, about 37.7, but really almost a whole millimeter of difference. So pretty cool there. We have a lug to lug of about 45.6 and a thickness of 13.3 and a lug width of 20. So overall the dimensions are pretty great on this watch. They are very nice. I think the 20mm lugs is a great idea. It just allows a lot of strap options. I think they could have gone with 18 and it maybe would have been more in proportion since it's of a smaller size, but I don't think it looks bad at all. The movement is a Seiko Mecha quartz movement. So basically that means that it is a quartz movement. As you see at the 6 o'clock sub-dial, we have this running seconds hand. Or not running seconds, we have the ticking seconds hand. But once you start the chronograph, you got not only a nice mechanical click, but we have a smooth sweep. That is because there is a mechanical module on top of the quartz movement. So let's start off with this watch's dial. So obviously it is a pretty typical chronograph. We have the nice 3 sub-dials at the 3, 6, and 9. We have a very stark and contrasted color scheme here. We have just all white, all black, no other colors, and all very well done. We have, as you can see, the tachymeter scale around the outer edge here. We have applied indices on the dial. They aren't too raised, but they are. We have this nice domed crystal. We have the black seconds hand, the black hour hand, the black minute hand, the black indices, the black subdials, and black tachymeter, black Dan Henry. And whatever I didn't say is black is now white. Oh, sorry. There's also the black minutes track in the outer edge. So there's a lot of nice little detail on this dial. As you can see, all around the outer edge, we have the lume pips at the very extremities for the hour markers. We have these nice little square indices here, or square, not indices, but square little delineators at certain markers there, which call reference to some Rolex Paul Newman type models. And we have a nice little lume strip on the tip of the seconds hand. Just overall, I think it's done very cleanly, very nicely. It is not too large, not too small, very well spaced, very well designed. And overall, I think they did a really good job on this dial. I really like the hands that they used. I mean, obviously, it's a homage to a Universal Geneve model, but the way that they just cut off, they're very starkly contrasted, and I like how they thin out. I just think the hands are done really well. And I think also it's very cool that they have the black hour and minute seconds hand, but all the subdials have white hands. So it's just a kind of nice little cool detail that they add in there. So here we are a little more up close and personal with this Dan Henry. As you can see, the printing is done very, very well. There's no really stray edges. The lettering is very crisp, very nicely done. As you can see from the dial, there's a slight eggshell texturing to it, which I think is very nice because it's not something that they had to do. They could have just gone for a plain white dial, but it's definitely a nice addition, a nice unique thing to have, and I'm pretty sure in contrast to a plain white dial, it probably adds some kind of visual interest from the wrist. Now, moving on, we see the finishing and the black coating that's done on these markers, that's done on these hands. It's done all very well. There's no chips in it, there's no discoloration. I think it's done very nicely. You can see the lume applied there on the hands is very crisp. There's the concentric circles in the subdials there, which again, just a nice little touch, a nice attention to detail. It even goes through those little square markers. The printing on the subdial, again, very, very nice. Taking a look around the dial, the outer track, very crisp, very nicely well done. Obviously right there, boom, a tiny imperfection, but again, one, it's not noticeable from the wrist, and two, this is a $260 watch, so you can't expect the world. But I think overall, it is very, 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 very nicely done for the price. Not a lot of imperfections, again, a little speck there, but all the applications, all the lume, all the printing, overall, very well done for the price. So here we got a lume shot of the Dan Henry, and I think this is a place where it again excels over the 1964. We have lume in all the pips, we have the double marker at the 12 to delineate, we have lume on all the sub-seconds hand, all the sub-second hands. And I think that's super, super cool. It adds to the legibility of the watch, and I think it just looks cool. Now, just visually looking at the watch, we can see the lume pips are brighter than the hands, which is interesting because I would think you would have a little more surface area with the hands to apply them to. But overall, the lume is better than not having lume at all. The lume and the pips hold on for a pretty good amount of time. Really quick, we'll do the common comparison with my Timex watch. So here we have the Timex right beside the Dan Henry. You can see obviously the Timex is a lot brighter, a lot, clearer, but the Dan Henry is still very legible in the dark, and all the elements are lumed, so I think Dan Henry did a good job on it. It looks nice. So moving on to the case. So obviously the case does take some inspiration from the Speedmaster and other similarly turned lug models. We have the somewhat slightly twisted lugs on this model. It isn't very detailed, and obviously if you take a Speedmaster, the Speedmaster's lugs are very much more well done and very much more well defined. It is just a very slightly inward turn at the outer edge right here. But on the wrist, I think it does look very nice. It does add another visual interest to the watch. I think because it's not just straight lugs, it just adds to the overall design. It adds to the overall way that the sun plays, the light plays with the lugs. And just it's a nice addition to have because that's an additional step of machining, it's an additional step of detail, additional step of design that has to be perfected, that has to be corrected multiple times over. So it's a lot of effort that went into a watch that cost relatively affordable amount of money. We could see that the lugs are just completely polished, leading into the brushed sides of the case, which are brushed horizontally. Very decently brushed. I'm not going to say it's the best brushing I've ever seen, but by no means is it badly done. I think for the price, even, it's very well done. If you can tell there, I don't know how well you can tell, but the underside of this bezel or the tachymeter scale is highly polished. So that's something that I think is an additional step that they had to do that they didn't have to pay attention to, but they took the extra step. They went the extra mile to do. We got the nice signed Dan Henry logo crown, and on the back we have this nice, beautiful racing car because the chronograph is paying homage to, racing chronographs. The Speedmaster before it was the Moon watch because the Moon watch wasn't until the late 60s, and obviously the Rolex Paul Newmans, the other racing chronographs such as that. So on the back case we see here it's a Mecha Quartz movement, stainless steel, Dan Henry the brand, the limited edition, and what number it is. This is 298 out of 1962. And we have a 50 meters of water resistance, which I don't necessarily trust because this is a chronograph. And yeah, the stamping done on this car is very nice. There's a lot of detail in that car and the nice brushed background. Yeah, but overall this car is done very well. There's a nice detail to it. It's not just a plain, very crudely done thing. And I like the nice kind of matted background that it lies on, the blasted background. Overall, I think the case has a very nice shape to it. It's very curvaceous, and that leads it to wearing very well on the wrist. It has a relatively short lug to lug distance, and I think the overall shape, the overall slimness relatively with having, if you're excluding the dome and the bezel and the tachymeter scale, it wears relatively well and flat on the wrist. Something I did forget to mention earlier about this crystal is it is a regular monochrome crystal, but what Dan Henry does is they add like what they call a sapphire coating over the top to make it more scratch resistant. I had a Dan Henry model before, the other chronograph, the 1964, and that did have a scratch on it. I bought it with a scratch on it, and I don't know how it got scratched, but obviously it is not the most robust coating, but I'm pretty sure it adds a little more extra resistance over just a regular mineral crystal crystal. So moving on to how this watch wears. Let's put it on the wrist. Earlier today I was wearing my Visitor. So here we have the watch on my 6.5 inch wrist, and as you can see, it wears very securely in the middle of my wrist. It does not overhang by any means. It wears very nicely. It wears very compactly, and you can see even from the wrist, you can see the nice slight turn in those lugs. It just adds a nice little visual interest, the way the tachymeter, the numerals light up and play with light, the way the dome of the crystal adds a little distortion to the watch. I think it is a very comfortable wearing watch. It's a very nice wearing watch, and I think the monochromatic look of it is very good. It looks very cool to me, and it is very much an affordable version of some watches that are unattainable to the common man. And that's really pretty much all of what Dan Henry is standing for. Right now I have it on this Archer white silicone strap, and I think it goes with the watch really well, mainly because we have a white dial and the white strap kind of just complements it. It blends in with the whole design. I'll show you really quickly how it looks on the other straps. Just quickly to note, it does wear very slimly on the wrist, wears very compact because it wears very, sorry, just a thing to note really quick, it does wear very compact on the wrist. It wears very close to the wrist because of how curvy the lugs are, and it's a very comfortable piece to wear. The pushers don't dig in or anything. Super nice. So here we have it on the brown strap. I think it is a nice color tone, a nice play. The strap is not bad at all. It's very nicely made. The nice tapering from 20 to 16. And I think it's a nice, wintry fall look for the watch. But sometimes you just want it to blend in, not stand out too much. But the brown is definitely a nice addition. If we put it on the black strap, I think this actually looks a lot better. The black strap ties in more with the monochromatic look of it. It just plays with the watch itself. It may be a little dressy for the style of watch, but overall I think it's really good. Maybe if they would have done like a contrast white stitching, it would have looked better, but I think the black stitching is a nice choice, very understated. I think they just could have maybe done white stitching to try to match it, and that would have been pretty cool. Pros and cons of this watch. Definite pro is, I think, design. It is a very desirable design. It is a nicely executed design. I think all the elements come together really well. I like the monochromatic look of it. I really find it interesting how the hands are black. I think it adds to the legibility because of the stark white dial, and I've never had a hard time reading the time on this dial. So I think that's something that's very nice and something I really haven't seen with a lot of watches, so that's a uniqueness factor to it. Something I also really like is the twisted lugs. It's not overly twisted, it's not in your face, but it's just a nice little visual interest that you see from the wrist. Obviously it's done to a better and higher standard on the Speedmaster. The Speedmaster's lugs themselves have a brushed and polished section to them. But again, this is a $260 watch, and it's done it in a very nice, understated, and good way. I like all the design choices. I like the fact that they have raised hour indices. I like the mecha quartz movement because it has the dependability of the quartz but the nice mechanical sweep to it. And overall, I think it's a very crisp, clean looking watch. Now, negatives I would say is, I guess, the straps it comes with. I'm not in love with the brown. And of course, as I said, I wish the black had white stitching to it. I think it would have made it fit the watch more. Something I also don't love about the watch is the lume. It's not the strongest, it's not the best, but it is there, so I guess it's nicer to have it than to not have it. Again, as I said, that coating in the dome crystal may not hold up perfectly over time, but I think the fact that it is a mineral crystal instead of a sapphire is a good choice, because not only can sapphire shatter easier, but it is also more expensive to make it into a dome. So this watch would become not $260, but it would become, closer to that $1,000 mark, probably closer to that $500-600 mark maybe, just because the dome and the crystal. It's a much more expensive process. But honestly, overall, I really enjoy this watch. There aren't a lot of cons because I don't have a lot of cons for it. Something some people may look negatively on is that it's a very homage piece. But that is what Dan Henry does, I think it's still unique. I still think the colorway is very nice. I still think the design is thought out. It is still very well executed. It's very well done, as we saw in the macro shots. And I love the watch. I'm glad they went for a sub 40mm case. I think it wears perfectly because of that. And overall, I think this is great value for money. Under $300, you're getting a piece of racing heritage almost. You know, you're getting a watch that looks a lot like more expensive pieces. You're getting a solid, dependable quartz movement. You're getting a very nicely executed piece, well printed, well finished. And overall, there's not a lot to complain about this watch. If you're on the fence about going with this watch, I would say jump in on it. It is a limited edition piece. He has sold out of his models before, and I think this is definitely one that deserves a place in your collection. The 1964 chronograph, which is his other similar chronograph looking style that comes with the beads of rice bracelet, it does not have a tachymeter scale. That watch I have also had, and I also did a review on it. If you had to make a choice between the two, I would say go for this one. I think the Evil Panda is cooler on the 1964 model, but for this model, I think the way the watch was executed, the design of it, I love the twisted lugs of it. I think the sizing, I believe, is a little smaller than the other watch, and the other watch does feel a little more circular and a little more bulbous on the wrist, if that makes sense. While this, I feel, blends in a little better almost. Maybe because of an illusion happening with the lugs, maybe because the tachymeter scale. I don't know. Maybe the color scheme. But I just love the little additions on this watch, the black hands, the just the everything, honestly. So I honestly would recommend this piece over the 1964, and if you're on the fence, you should definitely get this watch because you won't regret it. Thanks for watching.